The year is 452. The Roman Empire is falling apart. The Huns are burning and destroying northern Italy. Entire cities are disappearing. People are forced to flee just to stay alive. There's only one place left to escape to, and it doesn't look promising at all. A shallow lagoon just off the coast. Small islands made entirely of mud. No solid land, no roads, no fresh water, and yet the place everyone thought was uninhabitable becomes what we now know as Venice. Think about it. No roads, no farmland, no fresh water. Despite all these challenges, these people somehow managed to build one of the richest and most powerful cities the world has ever seen. So how do they do it? The answer is simple, but impressive: by thinking smart. When the first settlers stepped onto the islands, the ground beneath them was a nightmare. Soft, marshy clay, a surface that would sink even when touched. Building anything here seemed almost impossible, but the Venetians didn't give up. They got to work. They brought thousands of thick wooden piles from the forests of Croatia and began driving them into the ground, about 5 meters deep until they reached a much harder layer of clay. The piles were placed so close together that not only did they stabilize themselves, but they also compressed the surrounding soil. The water was pushed out, and the ground became much stronger. Once the piles were in place, the tops were cut off. Wooden beams were laid on top, and finally blocks of water-resistant Istrian stone were placed above them. And here's the best part. Because these wooden piles are completely submerged and cut off from oxygen, they don't rot. Even after more than 1,000 years, Venice is still standing on them. At first, houses were built from wood, but after repeated fires, the Venetians switched to brick. To keep the buildings lightweight, they were limited to no more than 3 stories. Instead of cement, they used lime mortar, because it's flexible. If the ground slowly shifts, the building doesn't crack. It moves with it. The inner walls were built in a crisscross pattern, while the heavier outer facades were reinforced with iron rods. Everything worked together, so the building behaved as a single structure, and it worked. The islands kept growing, but not outward. They grew toward each other. At first, boats were the only way to travel between them. Over time, the water became shallow enough that some areas could even be crossed on foot or on horseback. Bridges? Hard to believe, but for the first 500 years, Venice had almost no bridges at all. As the population grew and trade expanded, that changed. Everyone needed access to the same place. Rialto, the heart of commerce. So, the Doge announced a competition. Whoever designs the best bridge wins. The first bridge was a simple floating bridge. Then it became wooden, until it burned down and collapsed. After several failed attempts, the famous stone bridge was finally built. More than 12,000 wooden piles were driven into the canal banks, and over 10,000 tons of stone were placed on top. And yes, it's still standing today. As more bridges appeared, Venice became a city made entirely of canals. No roads, no cars. Everything moved on water. And surprisingly, this was a huge advantage. Trade was fast. Transportation was efficient. Pedestrians and boats were completely separated, so nothing got in the way. Before long, Venice became the trade capital of Europe. Money flowed through here. Power flowed through here. But then a serious problem emerged. Water. Water was everywhere, but not a single drop was drinkable. At first, fresh water was shipped in from the mainland, but once the population reached 170,000, that solution wasn't enough. Once again, the Venetians came up with a clever idea. They used the city's squares. They dug beneath them, lined the walls with waterproof clay, and filled the space with sand and stone. When it rained, water flowed across the stone surface of the square, filtered through the layers below and collected in a reservoir underneath. Gutters from nearby rooftops fed into the same system. The result? More than 600 wells across the city, an entire city surviving on rainwater. The last problem to solve was a more unpleasant waste. For years, people simply threw their waste out of windows. If you lived near a canal, you were lucky. If not, the streets were a mess. In the 16th century, underground tunnels were built. When the tide went out, waste collected. When the tide came back in, it was flushed into the canals. Twice a day the sea moved in and out, naturally cleaning the city. The salty water helped kill bacteria, keeping the streets surprisingly clean. And here's the most impressive part. When you look at Venice today, most of the bridges, canals, and buildings you see are hundreds of years old, and all of them are standing on a massive, man-made wooden forest hidden beneath the water. From a swamp to a world-class city.